Here's a short, punchy hook for your story. One glance, one whisper, and suddenly everything changed. If you want, I can give 3 to 5 alternative hooks that are equally gripping for YouTube shorts or video thumbnails. Do you want me to do that? The evening started like any other. I had come to his apartment to catch up with my friend, maybe share a laugh over old stories. Nothing more. The soft glow of the living room lamp, the faint scent of something baked in the kitchen, and the gentle hum of conversation set a warm, ordinary scene. Yet, the moment I stepped inside, there was a subtle shift in the air, as if the room had been waiting for something or someone to arrive. And then I saw her, not with intent at first, just a flicker at the edge of my vision, a woman moving through the room with effortless grace. She wasn't flashy or dramatic, but something about her presence made the space feel different. Every step, every tilt of her head, every small gesture carried a quiet authority, a natural elegance that demanded no attention, yet held it anyway. She smiled at someone across the room, and our eyes met. It was brief, almost accidental, yet it jolted me in a way I hadn't anticipated. There was recognition there. Not of me personally, but of a moment shared, a subtle acknowledgement that cut through the ordinary hum of the evening. She moved again, carrying a tray of drinks, laughing softly at a joke I didn't fully catch. The sound of her laughter lingered in my mind longer than it should have. Her perfume trailed faintly behind her, a delicate floral warmth that seemed to cling to the air. There was something disarming about her, not in appearance alone, but in the way she interacted with the room, with people, with me. Each motion, each glance, felt intimate, like she could make anyone feel noticed while remaining entirely herself. I reminded myself she was my friend's mother. That thought should have been enough to ground me. And yet, the moment she brushed past me, our hands accidentally touching as we reached for the same glass, I felt a curious spark, a subtle warmth that lingered far longer than it had any right to. I caught my breath and looked away, chastising myself internally. But I couldn't stop noticing her. Not really. Every detail seemed heightened. The gentle curve of her fingers, the soft fall of her hair, the quiet confidence behind her eyes. There was humor in her smile, subtle kindness in her gestures, and an undercurrent of something I couldn't name. Something magnetic. The evening stretched, and every encounter with her felt deliberate in its own way. When she handed me a plate in the kitchen, our fingers brushed again, this time intentionally lingering just a fraction longer. She didn't speak, didn't laugh. It was a quiet acknowledgement, a subtle spark sent between us that was almost electric. I realized, suddenly, that what had started as casual curiosity was becoming something I couldn't ignore, something that was stirring feelings I wasn't prepared to name. And then, as the room quieted, she leaned slightly closer, her voice soft, almost playful. "You don't realize what you've started." Her words hung in the air, light yet charged with an intensity one couldn't place. It wasn't just a tease, it was a statement, a warning, and an invitation all at once. My heart thudded. The night, the room, the people around us faded into the background. There was only her, and the undeniable pull of a connection that neither of us could, or would, deny. That whisper was the spark, the one that promised fire. The next few moments were a blur, though they lingered in my mind with vivid intensity. I tried to focus on my friend, to laugh at his jokes, to blend into the background, but her presence kept pulling me back, subtly, insistently. She had a way of occupying space without demanding it. Every movement measured, every glance deliberate enough to unsettle me without ever crossing a line. It was maddeningly magnetic. I found myself in the kitchen again, ostensibly offering to help with the dishes, but really just following the quiet pull of her energy. She was arranging utensils with an almost casual elegance, her hair falling softly around her shoulders, catching the light in a way that made it look impossibly luminous. When I reached for a glass at the same time as her, our fingers brushed, this time longer, deliberate yet subtle, and I felt my chest tighten. A warmth spread from my fingertips through my arm, and I realized how acutely aware I was of her presence. She looked at me then, not with overt amusement, not teasing, but with a quiet intensity that made my pulse skip. Her eyes held questions, unspoken statements, and a curiosity that mirrored my own. It was as if she could see through my thoughts, or at least through the carefully constructed facade I try to maintain. I wanted to speak, to say something clever, something that would mask the fluster rising inside me, but I was rooted in place by the gravity of her gaze. "You're quiet," she said softly, almost conversationally, though the weight behind her words made them feel far more intimate than the casual phrasing suggested. I swallowed, trying to ground myself, and managed a small smile. "Just taking all in," I replied, my voice sounding stranger to me than it did in my head. She tilted her head slightly, a faint, knowing smile tugging at her lips. There was a rhythm to her attention, her subtle nods, the way she let her eyes linger just a fraction longer than necessary, the quiet space she allowed for me to exist without pressure. Every gesture was deliberate yet restrained, creating a tension that was as exhilarating as it was dangerous. As we moved through the room together, her with a tray, me pretending to assist, the small brushes of our hands, the slight shifts in posture to make space, the occasional accidental laugh that made her eyes sparkle, all of it added up to a current I couldn't escape. The attraction wasn't loud or obvious. It was quiet, layered, and undeniably intoxicating. I found myself analyzing every detail, the curve of her smile, the soft cadence of her voice, the warmth that seemed to radiate from her without effort. At one point, she paused, turning slightly so that our shoulders almost touched. The proximity made my breath hitch, though she seemed entirely unaware, or at least unaffected. Her focus remained on the tray in her hands, but I felt the unspoken connection vibrating between us like a live wire. I wanted to retreat, to ground myself in logic, in reason, in the understanding that this was impossible. But instead, I leaned in slightly, caught in a gravity I didn't want to resist. Then she whispered, almost to herself but loud enough for me to catch, "You don't realize what you've started." The words hit me like a jolt, and the meaning behind them sank in. She wasn't warning me. She wasn't teasing frivolously. She was acknowledging something that had already begun between us, a slow, deliberate spark neither of us could ignore. My chest tightened again, awareness and anticipation intertwining in a way that left me both thrilled and terrified. That single, soft-spoken line had shifted the dynamic entirely. I was no longer just a visitor observing from the outside. I was part of something quietly dangerous, subtly intoxicating, and impossible to escape. And for the first time, I realized the slow burn had begun, and there was no turning back. The night seemed to stretch in a rhythm all its own, measured not by the ticking of clocks or the passing of hours, but by the quiet cadence of her presence. Even in a room full of people, I felt the world narrow around her. Every movement she made, every casual smile she offered, drew me closer, though nothing about it was overt or demanding. It was subtle, intoxicating, and entirely disarming. At one point, she disappeared for a few minutes, leaving the room quieter than before. I found myself scanning every corner, anticipating her return, my mind looping endlessly over our previous moments. The brush of her fingers on mine in the kitchen, the soft glint of amusement in her eyes, the lingering warmth of her words. When she reappeared, carrying a book she had been reading, my heart jumped unexpectedly. She moved with an effortless grace, placing herself nearby as if she belonged in the center of my attention, though the casualness of it made it feel almost accidental. We settled into a quiet corner of the living room, her presence both near and untouchable. The conversation began lightly, about trivial things, the book she held, the music playing faintly in the background, but beneath every word was a current neither of us could deny. She spoke slowly, thoughtfully, and I found myself hanging on each inflection, each subtle pause that suggested more than the words themselves. I caught myself watching the way her hands moved as she adjusted the book, how her fingers brushed against the pages almost reverently. When our knees touched lightly under the couch, I felt an electric pulse run through me. She didn't flinch. She didn't withdraw. Instead, her gaze found mine for a fraction of a second longer than it should have, and that single, fleeting look was enough to make my pulse spike. Every glance and gesture now carried weight. When she laughed softly at something I said, the warmth of it seemed to linger in the air between us. When she tilted her head in curiosity, I felt exposed yet welcomed, as if she could see every hidden thought I tried to mask. The subtle tension wasn't uncomfortable. It was magnetic, a shared acknowledgement that something had begun, and neither of us could, or wanted to, deny it. There was a deliberate restraint in her actions, a careful balance between intimacy and propriety that only heightened the tension. Every accidental touch, every shared silence, every soft smile acted like a thread pulling us closer, weaving a web that neither of us wanted to escape. I realized that the attraction wasn't about bold gestures or reckless declarations. It was in the quiet moments, the unspoken awareness, the mutual recognition of something dangerous and thrilling at once. At one point, she leaned forward slightly, adjusting the book at her lap, and our hands brushed again. This time, the touch was longer, more intentional, yet still subtle, electric in a way that made me painfully aware of both the closeness and the impossibility of the situation. I wanted to linger, to say something clever, to let the moment stretch into eternity, but the restraint she maintained made every heartbeat more acute, every glance more potent. Her whisper from earlier echoed in my mind. "You don't realize what you've started." I understood now that it wasn't just a tease. It was a statement of inevitability. The spark had ignited, and it had already begun to consume the space between us, quiet and unrelenting. My awareness of her, of us, had shifted. There was no turning back, only the slow, inevitable pull towards something deeper, something dangerously magnetic. And as the night continued, I realized that the connection was no longer just a fleeting intrigue. It was a slow burn, deliberate and intoxicating, and I was helplessly, thrillingly caught in its orbit. By now, the evening had settled into a quieter rhythm. The hum of conversation had dimmed, replaced by the occasional clink of dishes from the kitchen and the faint, persistent beat of music in the background. Yet in the corner of the living room, near the soft lamplight, the air between us felt charged, dense with an awareness neither of us could ignore. She was sitting on the couch, legs tucked beneath her, the book she had been holding now resting on her lap. She wasn't reading, not really. Instead, her eyes occasionally lifted to meet mine, scanning subtly, teasingly, as if measuring the weight of my attention. The way she moved, the gentle tilt of her head, the almost imperceptible arch of her brow, it all felt deliberate, but soft, drawing me in without a word. I joined her, careful not to invade her space, though our shoulders brushed lightly as I settled beside her. That brush, though minimal, sent a jolt through me, the heat of it lingering far longer than it should. Her presence was magnetic, subtle yet relentless, a force I couldn't resist even if I had wanted to. We began talking, lightly at first, about mundane things, a shared memory with my friend, a joke about the way he always lost his keys, the comfort of old familiarity. But the conversation quickly deepened, as it often did with her. She shared a memory from her past, a moment of vulnerability that made her seem even more real, more human. I listened, captivated, noticing the softness in her eyes when she recalled her fears, the careful pauses that revealed thoughtfulness, the quiet strength underlying every word. There was an intimacy in that moment, unspoken yet palpable. The small touches, once accidental, now felt charged with meaning. Her fingers brushing mine as she handed me the book, the subtle lean of her body toward mine when she spoke, the way our knees pressed together ever so slightly beneath the couch. Every gesture was a thread weaving a connection that neither of us could, or would, deny. "You're noticing everything, aren't you?" she said softly, almost teasingly, though her gaze held more than playfulness. It held awareness, acknowledgement, the recognition of the magnetic tension between us. I felt my pulse spike. I can't help it, I admitted, my voice quieter than I intended, betraying my fascination, my intrigue, my growing need to be near her. She smiled, a gentle, knowing curve of her lips that both reassured and unsettled me. Her fingers lingered near mine, almost touching, yet just shy of contact, keeping the tension taut, electric. There was no rush here, no overt moves, only a deliberate, intoxicating pacing that made every small movement feel monumental. Time seemed to stretch and collapse simultaneously. The rest of the room faded, the soft hum of the house, the distant sounds of the street outside. They all disappeared into the background. There was only her and the way she made my attention sharpen, my chest tighten, my thoughts unravel. I realized something dangerous and thrilling. I wasn't just aware of her presence anymore. I was aware of us, of the connection quietly growing, the subtle sparks flaring with every glance, every touch, every shared breath. And with that awareness came a fragile, exhilarating certainty. The slow burn had become undeniable, and there was no turning back. Her eyes met mine again, steady and soft, as if silently confirming what we both felt. A single thought surged through me. I was caught, not unwillingly, not regretfully, but completely, utterly, and thrillingly caught. The house had grown quieter, the energy shifting from lively chatter to something softer, more intimate. The kitchen lights cast a gentle glow, and even from across the room, I could feel her presence like a gravity pulling me in. Every time she moved, laughed, or tilted her head in thought, the world seemed to narrow around her, and I was helplessly aware of it. She was standing near the counter, pouring a glass of water, her posture relaxed yet commanding, as if she could simultaneously be effortless and magnetic. I followed her movement without thinking, offering to grab a napkin or help in some mundane way. But it was clear she didn't need my help. That was never the point. The point was the subtle closeness, the quiet, undeniable pull that had been building since the first brush of hands. As I reached for a bowl of fruit at the same time as her, our hands collided once more. This time, the touch lingered just long enough to make my pulse spike. I felt a jolt, not from desire alone, but from the awareness of the tension that had been quietly threading itself between us all evening. She didn't pull back, didn't flinch. Instead, her eyes met mine with a calm certainty, a knowing that unsettled and thrilled me at the same time. "You're dangerous," she said softly, almost teasing, but there was an edge beneath the playfulness. It wasn't flirtation in the conventional sense. It was something deeper, a recognition of the spark between us, a quiet acknowledgement that the connection was no longer subtle or accidental. I laughed nervously, unsure of how to respond, and realized with a start that my gaze had lingered too long. She noticed, of course. She always noticed. There was a subtle smile tugging at her lips, a gentle tilt of her head, and it was as if she was silently challenging me to lean into the tension rather than retreat from it. We continued our back and forth, words light on the surface but layered with meaning underneath. Every accidental brush of fingers, every shared glance, every fleeting moment of eye contact was amplified by the weight of unspoken attraction. I was acutely aware of how close we were standing, how the space between us seemed charged with invisible energy, and how easily a small movement could shift everything. At one point, she leaned forward slightly, reaching for a plate just beyond my grasp. Our arms brushed again, subtly, almost intentionally, and I felt a warmth spreading through me. It wasn't just physical. It was a recognition, an acknowledgement, a quiet promise that this slow burn had moved beyond curiosity into something far more compelling. Her voice, soft and deliberate, drew me further in. "You really don't realize what you've started," she repeated, this time with a hint of amusement, almost daring me to acknowledge the truth I had been trying to ignore. I swallowed hard, aware of the rapid thrum of my heart. The attraction was undeniable, and the tension between us had become a force that neither of us could ignore. Every glance, every touch, every unspoken word was a thread weaving us closer together, a slow, deliberate pull towards something I wasn't sure I was ready for, but couldn't resist. As she moved away, just slightly, leaving the air between us charged, I realized that nothing about this night, or the nights to come, would be ordinary again. The slow burn had ignited fully, and the anticipation of what might come next was as thrilling as it was terrifying. The night had taken on a quiet, almost sacred rhythm. The soft glow of the lamps and the distant hum of the city outside created a cocoon that seemed entirely separate from the rest of the world. Even the usual sounds of the house, the occasional creak of the floorboards, the faint whir of the refrigerator, felt muted, as if aware that something delicate was unfolding in their midst. She was sitting on the edge of the couch, her posture relaxed yet intentional, as if every movement was measured to both draw attention and maintain control. I approached slowly, unsure of what I would say or do, but unable to resist the pull that had been building between us all evening. The closer I got, the more acutely aware I became of her presence. The faint warmth radiating from her skin, the soft fragrance of her perfume, the way her eyes seemed to hold a quiet, knowing light. We settled into the couch together, shoulders brushing lightly. It was a simple, unremarkable contact, yet the electricity of it made my chest tighten. Every movement she made seemed to echo in my senses. The subtle tilt of her head, the gentle shift of her hands, the soft, almost imperceptible lean toward me when she spoke. The tension wasn't loud, it wasn't desperate. It was quiet, deliberate, and profoundly intimate. Our conversation began with casual topics, the kind that might seem mundane to anyone else. But with her, even the ordinary felt layered with significance. She shared a story from her past, a memory that revealed vulnerability beneath her calm, confident exterior. I listened, captivated not only by her words, but by the way she delivered them. The careful pauses, the soft laughter, the fleeting glances that seemed to acknowledge my undivided attention. I realized that the connection between us was no longer just subtle attraction. It had grown into something almost tangible, a thread we were weaving together through glances, touches, and shared silences. Each small gesture carried meaning. Her hand brushing against mine as she adjusted her sleeve, the quiet way our knees touched under the couch, the fleeting eye contact that lingered just a heartbeat too long. It was all deliberate, restrained, and intoxicating. You know, she said softly, almost conspiratorially, "This is dangerous." Her voice was calm, melodic, yet there was a weight beneath it that made my heart thrum. "I know," I replied quietly, feeling the truth of her words reverberate through me. And yet, I can't look away. A faint, knowing smile tugged at her lips. She didn't move closer, didn't push boundaries overtly, but the space between us seemed to shrink with every shared glance, every quiet breath. The tension was no longer just physical. It was emotional, a current running between us that demanded acknowledgement. I found myself studying her, noticing details I hadn't before. The soft curl of her hair, the subtle play of light on her cheek, the depth in her eyes that held both humor and something I couldn't yet name. I felt seen, truly seen, in a way that both exhilarated and terrified me. By the end of our conversation, the air between us was electric but controlled, filled with anticipation and unspoken promise. The slow burn had become a steady flame, warm and insistent, and I understood, with both awe and trepidation, that nothing about our connection would ever be the same. The house was quieter than it had been all evening. Most of the guests had gone, leaving only the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of settling floorboards to punctuate the stillness. Yet in that quiet, the energy between us was palpable, tense, magnetic, and almost tangible. Every glance, every subtle gesture, every soft-spoken word carried weight, as if the night itself were holding its breath. She was perched on the couch, legs tucked beneath her, a book resting unopened on her lap. Her attention wasn't on the pages. It was on me, in the subtle tilt of her head, in the faint curve of her smile, in the way her eyes lingered just a fraction longer than necessary. The moment I approached, I felt it. The pull, the gravity of her presence that had been building all evening, now undeniable, almost impossible to resist. We sat close, close enough for our shoulders to brush, but far enough to preserve the tension that had become so deliciously unbearable. It was quiet first. No word were needed. The shared silence was electric. Each heartbeat, each shallow breath, a rhythm that drew us deeper into a private orbit. Even the smallest movements, her fingers lightly touching the edge of the book, my hand resting near hers on the couch, felt monumental, charged with unspoken possibility. "You stayed," she said softly, almost to herself, almost like a confirmation, though her eyes searched mine for the answer she already knew. "I did," I whispered, voice low, steadying myself against the fluttering in my chest. "I wanted to." Her lips curved into a knowing smile. There was no teasing in it, no game, only acknowledgement. The connection we had nurtured over the evening, through glances, brushes of hands, and quiet conversations, had shifted into something profound, something neither of us could deny. We spoke then, in hushed tones, of nothing and everything. Childhood memories, fleeting regrets, tiny vulnerabilities we didn't usually show to the world. Each word was a thread weaving us closer together, stitching the night with intimacy and trust. And still, the tension simmered beneath the surface, a constant reminder of the attraction neither of us could ignore. At one point, our hands met, naturally, tentatively at first, then with increasing certainty. The warmth of her skin, the subtle pressure of her fingers, grounded me and set my pulse racing at the same time. I realized then that this connection, quiet and restrained as it was, had grown into something undeniable, something impossible to ignore. She leaned slightly closer, her eyes holding mine in a gaze that was soft, yet charged with intent. Her voice dropped to a whisper, low enough for only me to hear. "You don't realize what you've started." Those words lingered between us, heavier now, layered with meaning, teasing at the boundaries of what we could dare to explore. It wasn't a warning. It wasn't a challenge. It was a promise and a confession all at once. I felt my chest tighten, awareness sharpening in every nerve. The slow burn had become a fire, restrained yet undeniable, and I knew this was only the beginning. Whatever came next, whatever choices lay ahead, the night had changed everything. And as she leaned back, still watching me with that quiet, knowing smile, I realized I was standing on the edge of something thrilling and dangerous, a connection that demanded attention, courage, and patience. Something I couldn't stop and wouldn't want to. The world outside had disappeared. The room, the quiet, the shared glances, they were all that mattered. And in that suspended moment, I understood one truth with crystal clarity. Nothing would ever be the same again.